Okay.
All right. Welcome to another episode of a documentary podcast. I'm Josh.
And I'm Catherine.
And coffee is delicious.
I've got coffee as well, but I didn't make mine, so.
Oh no.
Yikes. Yeah.
Where did you get it?
I went to Thump as usual.
Oh, I love Thump.
Yep,
so
right
good.
down the block. Yep.
Yeah, if you're ever in Denver, go to Thump and get some coffee.
Yeah, great espresso.
Absolutely. So, how have you been since the last episode?
I've been pretty good. Actually just started working on a new documentary, so that's been pretty exciting.
That's exciting. As cinematographer?
Yeah.
Or?
Co-producing and as cinematographer, so.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Are you allowed to say what the premise is?
I think so. I'll just say it's about sort of the inequality of bail bonds.
Oh. That's
and
a really...
how...
Yeah. It's insane, actually. When you really sit down and think about bail, it's another one of those things that's just so obviously about, like, if you're poor, you're stuck in jail. If you're rich, then you can get immediately out. No big deal.
It's interesting because at the same time someone approached me about the project. There's a lot of legislation in Colorado going through right now about trying to eliminate bonds for petty crime. So it's cool because it's starting to align with what we're setting out to do. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's what you need when you're making a documentary.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's perfect timing. So we have to get on it. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I've just been just making random stuff and getting ready to go down and shoot my doc. So
cool.
Which will be really exciting.
Yeah.
So today's very exciting because this is a episode about two things that we both really love and that a lot of people love, and it's true crime.
Yep. It's having a moment right now, or at least the last couple of years.
Yeah, it really has. And it's something that I definitely have gotten into. A lot of true crime, especially kind of with Errol Morris, starting with like The Thin Blue Line, where that film actually helped get somebody out of prison because of how poorly the cops like handled that case. And that seems to be like a lot of what's popular these days.
Yes, it seems like films are taking the approach of, are they guilty or not, even if a conviction has already gone through, even and a sentencing as well. And I think that's why people have really kind of latched on to all these like true crime docuseries, is because it's like you can be involved. You look at The Making of a Murderer and, well, Serial's a podcast, now a doc, but how these people are being retried because of the public's sort of outcry after watching.
Absolutely. And it's incredibly interesting to me, and like it really kind of shows the power of film. And I kind of want to get into that like later when we start talking about one of the things that we both picked. So before we get into that, let's get into things that we can suggest that people can watch now or what we've been watching lately.
Yeah. Do you want to start off?
Okay. So I just watched the HBO documentary, The Inventor.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it could definitely be considered a true crime because it's not like, it doesn't have to deal with like murder or killing or anything. It's about fraud, and it's incredibly interesting. It's about this like woman. She started this company when she was like 19 and had all these big people like Henry Kissinger and like Bill Clinton like calling her like, you know, the next like Steve Jobs, and like she was obsessed with Steve Jobs. And she started this like medical company, and you just have to watch it because the story behind this company is insane. And it's from Alex Gibney, who did Scientology, the prison of... Going Clear, the prison of belief, I think is what it's called. Anyway, Going Clear, the Scientology documentary. He does Dirty Money on Netflix. he has a long history of doing these political documentaries just about all kinds of different subjects and like calling out corruption and stuff. So he also did Steve Jobs' Man in the Machine, which was kind of exciting that he went from that doing Steve Jobs to this woman who was like super obsessed with Steve Jobs, but yeah, kind of missed the point. So yeah, what about you?
So I recently went and saw Birds of Passage because that was in theaters at the Mayan here. As much as it's not a documentary, it's one of those. It's almost like a documentary in the way that it's very anthropological. The director Christina Gallego also did what was it called? Something Serpent. Do you know the black and white film that came out a couple years ago?
Yeah. What was that called?
Oh,
here, I'm gonna look it up.
Yeah, you look it up.
Yeah, you talk about the film, and then
I'm terrible with names, but that was an incredible film. And this one is sort of about how the drug trade got started in Colombia in the '60s. But it's cool. It follows this family through the '60s up through the '80s.
Embrace the Serpent.
Embrace of the Serpent. Also a great film. Recommend seeing if you like documentaries because it kind of plays as one.
And if you don't like documentaries, then why are you listening to our podcast?
Exactly. But yeah, so the film follows this Aboriginal family in Colombia and how just by a matter of a couple of events, the drug trade starts to take off, and just the havoc it wreaks on the community. And it's really very beautifully shot, a great way to sort of learn about the culture and the communities there as well. But it does point a lot of fingers at the U.S., but like not in a way that's like, hammer on the nail. It's quite subtle, but I definitely recommend it.
Nice. The other one I've been watching, which we're going to get into in the next segment, but I'll just mention it here, is I just finished this morning the 3rd episode of The Case Against Adnand Seyed. And we'll get into that in the next section, where we're going to talk about some of our favorite true crime documentaries. All right, today we're talking about our favorite true crime picks, and I have a lot written down, so in order to keep this short, let's just jump into it.
Yes, yeah. I tried to keep it to 3, and I think we have some crossover, so that's good. That'll probably help us.
I did a bad job. I have 7 written down here. We don't have to get really into all of them, but I have 7 that I was like, oh, these are all really good. And for different reasons, so.
Yeah, because it's similar to documentary. True crime has also evolved to the point where there's so many different types of true crime, like docs. Yeah.
For sure. Which is kind of like, I have a little bit of everything on my list, which is pretty exciting. But
so do we want to start then with the case of, or the case against Adnan Syed?
Yeah, so let's talk about...
Seyed, not
Seyed.
Syed.
So let's talk about that, because we've already brought it up a couple times. And this is based on the same story that the podcast Serial covered. And it's from Amy Berg, who directed 2 other wonderful true crime films. One, West of Memphis, which is about the Memphis 5. And then the other one is Deliver Us from Evil, which is a documentary kind of dealing with priests who sexually abuse children. They're both great and powerful and very hard to watch films.
Yeah. This one's a bit easier to watch, I'd say.
Yeah. So what are your impressions of it? Like, what are your initial thoughts?
I really love it, actually. I was not expecting to, because I went in being like, I think I said this before, quite skeptical, because I've already listened to Serial, loved it when it came out, but I was like, I don't need to watch something I've already sort of heard. But how well this documentary is produced, I was hooked like instantaneously. Like the fact that it provides a way more human and personal level than the that I found the podcast did, because they have the journals of what is the girl's name?
Heyman Lee.
They have Heyman Lee's journals, and they're narrated over these like beautiful animations with a great score. So as much as she's not alive, they're able to sort of bring her into the film and her identity and sort of a bit of her opinion, which I think the podcast was lacking a lot of. And it brings in a lot more players. Is driven by the sister, who I think is also quite interesting. The sister of Adnand Seyed. Yeah, and it's not just a who's guilty. It's sort of a how this affected the high school and the people around the two of them. So yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier, is that like when it comes to the power of film is just, I have listened to Serial, but seeing everyone talk with their faces and getting a feel for who they are as human beings is so much more present in the film version. And like it was a real kind of testament to cinema, you know, because obviously we have a podcast too, and I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I think it's a great form of like communicating stories and conversations and topics. But putting this story, like the documentary, and maybe in the hands of a different documentarian, it wouldn't have been as good. But yeah, it's incredibly well done and beautiful and feels very personal, and you kind of get a real feel for how much this is affecting everyone's lives.
Yeah.
Which you didn't really get out of the podcast, but you really feel like how much this is kind of like one of the girls, like she's changed her name, you know, she is sick of talking about this, and you kind of really get a feel for how negatively this is affecting and stressing out a whole community of people.
Yeah. Yeah, whereas it felt like the other one was more about the trial and the murder. This one, yeah, it's about the community and sort of what it does to people. And I mean, I've only watched 2 of the episodes, so maybe that will change a bit. But just, yeah, seeing the faces, I think, added such another layer that the podcast couldn't really touch on.
Absolutely. And I feel like maybe, I hope this doesn't come off bad, but I feel like Amy Berg, the director of this film, you can feel her compassion a lot more than you could through the podcast.
Well, that was a huge criticism, actually, of the podcast, was the lack of attention to the victim and the lack of sort of compassion in a way. It seemed to be a bit, ooh, did he do it? Did he not? Like very heightened versus this is an actual murder. People were affected by it.
Absolutely. Fun fact about the animation that you mentioned, which was incredibly beautiful. It's from the woman who did the animation for Diary of a Teenage Girl as well.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay, yeah.
Which, if you haven't seen that movie, not a documentary, but very, very good. And very beautiful. Hard to watch film, but very, very well done.
Yeah.
That was part of the thing they wanted to do, is like they had all these diaries, and they were like, how do we bring Hay to life so we can kind of see what she was like as a person?
Yeah.
Because she definitely gets lost in all of it, and because it's terrible, like what these cops did and stuff, and like the whole case is very frustrating. But at the same time, whenever cops do things like this and they put the wrong person in jail and they get their mindset on like just getting the case over with, that is so frustrating for the victims, families especially, like to have to relitigate this over and over again because of like how terribly this case was run. I mean, it's heartbreaking.
It's like there's no winners on either side, and I think the film does the documentary does a really good job of showing that like everyone's being devastated right now. Yeah,
there's a really powerful moment with Adnan's mom, I think in episode 3. Maybe it's in episode 3. I think it's in episode 3. Might be in 2. But you'll get there. People will get there. But there's a really powerful moment, like when she's talking about Hay, and it's pretty intense. But yeah, so I definitely think that I'm interested to see what the last episode is
Mm-hmm.
like, what the conclusion is. Because sometimes these series are a little bit frustrating because they don't really have a conclusion.
Yes, that's what I was about. That was one of my comments about just in general I had written down was that most of these do not end. And I think that's why they hook you, is because you have to form your own conclusion on what happens.
Yeah.
But
And
sometimes it's nice if they wrap up. So, yeah.
which brings me to one of my picks,
Yeah.
which is the HBO series The Jinx.
I have not seen that. That was on my list of ones to watch
Oh,
for now. I know.
yeah.
But
No,
talk
you're
about it
good.
'cause
You're
I'd love
good.
to hear about it.
You have to see The Jinx. It is a tight 5 or 6 episodes. I'm forgetting off the top of my head. And the journey you go on in this true crime doc is incredibly interesting. A, because the filmmaker behind the documentary made a fictional film version earlier on, starring Kirsten Dunst and Ryan Gosling, called All Good Things. I think it's called All Good Things. Yeah. So All Good Things. The director is Andrew Jarecki, and like I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have already seen this, and if you haven't, I don't want to give anything away. Maybe you've heard the story, maybe, but this is definitely one where you're left without any questions, and that was kind of it was horrible, like a horrible story, and but as a film, it was just so powerful and impactful, and the journalism behind it was amazing. So I definitely suggest anyone see that. It's on HBO. All the episodes should be up there. And then another thing I wanted to say about the Adnan Seyed film is actually, never mind. I don't have anything else to say about it. So what do you got next? I think
So the next one,
we might have another overlap.
do we have? So I'm gonna go actually with the next one is the casting of John Benet.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I've seen that. It's not on
That
my list, but I have seen it.
And it's not full. It's described actually as a hybrid. But it's cool. It has local ties to here. One, because the murder happened in Boulder, and so they filmed here as well. And it was directed by Kitty Green in 2017. What's interesting is she's actually directing the new Weinstein documentary called The Assistant, which I'm really curious to see what that's like, just because she has a very unique style. But this one's a very meta take on the murder of John Benet. So she explores the death of her through the angle of the impact it left culturally and societally, or socially. So they are telling people they're casting for a John Benet film, but in actuality, they're using all the footage of the interviews and the role playing these people are doing. So they go and they film the casting process for this fake film they're never going to make. And so they interview people who are interested in the different roles of the players of this murder. So both the parents, the brother, and the cops as well. And just watching how these people sort of interact in their obsession with pop culture and celebrity and how they can tie themselves to the murder and their own conspiracy theories says a lot about, I think, us as humans. And it's a very interesting take on a crime or a murder that I haven't seen done before. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it was funny because that was so controversial for a lot of people, that how they went about making the film.
True, that is very true.
Yeah, as far as also just expectations versus what the film became, which for me was it was nice to see something different that really dove into this story from a perspective of what people heard through the media. We've already heard the story numerous times.
Yeah.
So hearing about what these people heard about is kind of what the film is. And seeing the scenes where they act out.
The watermelon scene, that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was a really interesting film, and I thought that it was done really beautifully, and it's definitely maybe not your typical true crime.
Mm-mm.
But I do like the blending of kind of narrative, kind of filmmaking with like documentary. There's
Mm-hmm.
because it kind of reminds me of another film that is now playing on Canopy called Kate Plays Christine, um, which is like this actress. She's like studying for a movie about this. So it's a documentary about this actress who's studying for a movie about this journalist who killed herself on air.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And the movie that they were going to make was never actually a movie they were going to make, but it was about how to, like, this actress researching a movie. So it was a documentary, but it was like based on this kind of same premise of like making a film that is never going to be made. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Am I making sense, people out there? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm getting caught up because they're so meta, but
Yeah.
definitely like it kind of had that similar tone, yeah,
Yeah.
and premise. I mean, the premise is kind of similar. Just the fact
True.
that they're like, you know, this one was about an actor who was already cast in the role of for the movie that wasn't going to happen, and she knew the movie wasn't going to happen. She knew she was making a documentary, so it's
Yeah.
but they're exploring the story through like through
Manipulation almost. I
Yeah.
feel like John Benet, you could. I'm always curious with that one if it did cross the line, because I think that's always a huge question in documentaries, being honest with your subjects, and not just using them as characters or sort of pawns in your overall story. Because this one, from what I heard through other people, was that everyone who did the interview or casting process had no clue it was going to be a documentary.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people come across looking like they're obsessed with the murder, or how can I tie myself to this pop culture phenomenon and like want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
And they don't come across very well. But when you sign a waiver, you sign a waiver. So
Yeah.
I don't know, like, I heard someone who worked on the film speak, and they were like, they didn't feel like they crossed a line. But then I've heard from people who knew people involved that they felt that that wasn't the case. So it's
Yeah.
just, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and there's actually a really good book on the subject that I mentioned in our first episode, and I think I let you borrow the book, which I just
Yes,
remembered,
Yeah.
called Speaking Truth with Film. And it really kind of goes into a lot of like this history of documentaries that it's about that line and like where it is. Because they talk about like there were some movies, who was it? Was it Bergman? Or no, Louise Buñuel. So he made this like documentary that was like documentary footage, but he was like narrating it in like a really mean and judgmental way, like calling these people like, you know what I mean? Just like
Yeah.
being really nasty. But that was what the film was about. It was about how documentarians or like narrators and stuff can manipulate an audience. So it's kind of like, where does, yeah, it's really strange.
And you kind of have to border that line too. And so I don't think anyone can ever really fully say if you cross the line or not.
Yeah.
Because it's so tricky.
And it's really subjective. Like if it makes you uncomfortable and you feel like people are being manipulated in a negative way, then you're going to have a bad reaction to the film, and that's your prerogative.
But then someone else could view it and not think that way. So it's all about your, like, the experience you're bringing to it, or
Yeah, so definitely anyone out there, go read this book by Bill Nichols, Speaking Truth with Film. It really dives into this subject matter, and it's really interesting. So my next film has another tie-in with this Jean Benet one because it takes place in Colorado, and it's also a Netflix film, but it's called Voyeur.
I have not seen that one either, so
Yeah, so definitely go
another one
watch
for
it.
the list.
Yeah, so basically it takes place in like this writer, Gay Talese. He came to Denver to write about this hotel or this motel that was over on East Colfax. And this guy basically built all of this like infrastructure within his motel to be able to spy on people. and he spied on people for years, like watched them like sleeping, eating, having sex, whatever. And it's super creepy. And the detail that it goes into, and like this guy's justification for doing it, they actually get to follow the guy around as well as the writer who wrote the article that inspired this film.
It's a New Yorker piece, right?
Yeah, so
I read the article. Yeah, I didn't know
yes.
there was a documentary about it. Okay.
Yeah, it kind of came in under the radar. It's just like one of those Netflix things where it just got dumped and like, and then I didn't even know it was coming out. I just randomly passed it up and I was like, Voyeur documentary, what's that? And then I read it and I was like, oh, this is that gay Talese story. So definitely go read the story in New York Times. And the hotel has since, I've actually went and passed by the area where the hotel used to be, and like it's been torn down since. But it's kind of interesting because it's just such a specific type of story, and some of the stuff that this guy claims to have seen, I don't know. It's wild. You kind of wonder too, like the narrator of the story, you kind of wonder if this guy, how much was maybe just like him being delusional or lying, or how much of it was actually truthful, which just makes the film really interesting.
Cool. I definitely have to check that out. I had no clue there was a documentary on it.
Yeah, it's really well
One
done.
of the other
too,
things lost in the Netflix jumble.
I know. It happens a lot.
Yeah.
Did you get a chance to watch the Ted Bundy tapes?
I have not, because everyone says they're terrible.
Really?
I don't know. I shouldn't always take other people's opinions like to heart, but a lot of people were like, it wasn't that great. And since I've got so many other things I need to watch, it's gotten bumped to the bottom.
Right.
What did you think of them?
I thought it was engrossing. I mean, it's 4 episodes, and I've watched them pretty much back to back.
Yeah.
My wife said that it wasn't like that much new information, but for me, just kind of the breadth of like how much his voice is in it and how much footage they had and stuff, and how much focus they had on a lot of the victims, like kind of really put it in perspective on just how monstrous this guy was. And not that we didn't already know that, but
yeah.
But it definitely like gave a little perspective, kind of similar to the listening to Serial and then watching the Adnand Seyed thing. Like I thought it kind of like, because there's so much Ted Bundy stuff, but it's all really poorly made. I thought that this was actually really well done. Okay,
that's good to know. Because I find I actually don't know that much about Ted Bundy because a lot of the stuff, it's like your typical documentary that just gets a bit boring.
Yeah.
So maybe I will watch this one soon then.
Definitely. It's worth giving it a try.
Oh. Yeah.
So what's your next pick?
So my next one is probably the classic, and I think what sort of kicked off all the sort of crime docs is The Thin Blue Line by Errol Morris. If you haven't, I think everyone's probably heard of it, or even at least seen it by this point. So it came out in 1988. It almost feels like a narrative film, with how many reenactments it uses. And so it tells the story of Randall Adams, a man sentenced to death for a murder he didn't commit. And it just follows this night between him and David Harris and the cops, and how this police officer gets murdered and we don't know who actually, or do they tell you who does it at the beginning? I should start that over. Because we know from the beginning that because I haven't seen it for like a year. I
don't think that they tell you from the beginning, because I remember being kind of surprised by the conclusion.
Yes, yeah. But anyway, it weaves this web between interviews, reenactments, and then some audio voiceover to create this web of like who did it, who didn't, and how people can be so easily wrongly convicted as well.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about this film, too, is just really kind of putting in perspective how in-depth Errol Morris gets with his research.
Yes.
Because, like, as far as, like, these kind of films that we're talking about, like what the Adnan Seyed thing is trying to do, what Making a Murderer was trying to do, what the The Keepers, just all these films, just all these films just kind of about these wrongful convictions. The Staircase, I mean, there's just so many now. This was kind of like the first one, and it was impactful. Like, it got a guy out of prison.
Yeah.
He was on death row, right?
Yes, he was on death row.
Yeah, he was on death row, and this film got him out of prison because it made such a compelling case.
And you're right, the details of this film are incredible. And it's not just like stating the details, it's like visually the details. I just remember, like, visually I can still remember this film, even though it's been a year. It's like the lights flashing, or like the fog coming through, or the road. I don't really remember what most of the documentary footage looks like, but a lot of it's so mixed you don't know, and that's interesting as well.
Yeah. Errol Morris and his reenactments, I think everybody, before they start doing reenactments, should go watch his films and just see how to do it right.
Yes, yeah, he does it right, because he doesn't try to recreate the scene. He tries to recreate moments or like the tone of a place. So it ends up being like a lot of close-ups, and he loves playing with crazy angles and interesting lighting, and that's what he does. So you feel like you're seeing a piece of it and not the whole thing, and then you create the scene yourself with the pieces, and it makes it seem more truthful than like I'm this person, and like reenacting the whole thing.
Yeah, which I will say, the Adnand Seyed movie actually does have some like reenacted scenes, but you could barely tell that they were there.
Yeah, that's
especially
true.
with like Jay talking to the cops. And so I think I think Amy Berg kind of took a page out of The Thin Blue Line and like did some good reenactment stuff, because it blends right in with the film.
It does, yeah.
Whereas, like,
I didn't even notice that. Yeah.
So Errol Morris, I think, has a less successful film series on Netflix right now, where he uses reenactments, but they're like full on acted with like actors, and it really bogs down, I think, the interviews and stuff, and it really bogs the story down, because you're just like, it's hard to believe, if that makes sense. Like, it doesn't make a stronger case for the film. It like makes you believe less, which I think is clearly not what you want to be doing.
No, and especially from someone like him. Oh, is that the new thing that came out that like
Wormwood?
Kind of, got a bit of controversy.
Yeah, it's called Wormwood.
Yeah.
But yeah, not my favorite Errol Morris film. I had a hard time finishing it.
Yeah, usually his films are super easy to watch. And I'd say, like, if you're just getting into sort of like the true crime docuseries, or even just documentaries in general, hopefully you've seen a few more before, but I think this is like a really good one to start with, because it's...
Absolutely. It's kind of one of those seminal films that I think everyone has to see, because you kind of see where, like, what inspired things like Forensic Files, or... But, like, it did it way better. And it was a lot more ethical, because I think that it really like kind of questioned the whole system of like kind of how much power sometimes these like small town cops have to put people away on flimsy charges. And I think that is a conversation that needs to be had, especially in a country that has more people incarcerated than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
And we got to like question whether that's good or not, and why that is. And part of it, I think, is a lot of this kind of stuff. And obviously there's the other stuff like implicit bias, and we can get in all that, the drug war. But this one specifically, I think, is like a really interesting case of that kind of what set the tone for true crime films in the future, and kind of like revolutionized like reenactments and using like narrative filmmaking tactics in documentary.
Cool. So do you have another one to talk about?
I do.
Okay.
So I've kind of been powering through mine.
Yeah.
So I have two more.
Okay.
So one of them I'm going to give a quick mention, because maybe you haven't seen it. It's called Sour Grapes.
Not seen that one either. I have a lot of films I need to watch this week. I know.
Now. So Sour Grapes is like it's this guy who basically like committed this huge amount of fraud selling like fake wines. So like he would buy cheap wines, relabel them, do all this stuff to trick these like wine buyers, and he would sell them as like these fancy like $10,000 bottles or whatnot, and just like the rarest wines in the world. And just the story behind it is incredibly fascinating. This person that was doing this, super fascinating story. It's kind of one of those entertaining movies where you're not walking away like feeling like everything is terrible and the world is falling apart. You're just like, wow, this guy really was very intelligent, used it in the wrong way, but it was really entertaining. Kind of like a thriller, I would say. And then the last one I have, which maybe if you've seen it, we can talk more about, is it's a series, OJ Made in America.
I've started it.
Yeah, so I just thought that as far as like cinema putting things in, like later on coming back, revisiting a thing that was like you saw through the media lens, like as far as it being such a part of like hype, and giving you a fuller picture. Like I haven't seen anything do that in a case that I thought I knew stuff about. Like this thing really like opened it wide for me, just like the whole perspective, like because I was at an age where like I didn't really know OJ as the football player or the celebrity. I knew OJ as the guy who probably murdered his wife. And that's it. Mm-hmm. And then later on, the
glove didn't fit. Yeah.
Yeah, I knew the hype stuff because I was that age when that all happened. So going back and revisiting it and getting a fuller picture of like his football career, his whole journey up until that moment, learning more about his wife and the people around him and how gruesome this murder was. And not just like, oh, OJ murdered his wife. It was like a horrible, gruesome act that shouldn't really be joked about. And we shouldn't forget how gruesome it was.
Yeah, and I think once again, it's like news outlets can kind of brush over the victims and sensationalize these events. And that's what I love so much about like these docuseries is like they have the time and the sort of the tools to really dive into these issues, and you start to realize like the story I was told actually isn't the full story.
Yeah. And I think that can be like a good theme with like something from like a podcast or a TV show or something like that, like being transferred over into something that gets more in depth.
Yeah.
And like really treating it like film and like treating humans like they're human, you know, it can be really powerful to put things in perspective. And
it's nice that it seems like everyone is willing to sort of consume this content too.
Yeah.
That we're starting to like seek that and look for that, not just the quick story, but like I have friends who, no background in film, no background in documentary, but like love watching these things. And it's cool to know that we're getting a bigger picture than just what the news outlets want to flash really quickly.
Absolutely. And then I think like elevated things like OJ Made in America, The Thin Blue Line, like things that are just really good films, like actually get seen, which is nice. Is there any other like, do you have any like ones that almost made your list that you want to like shout out real quick?
All right, let me see.
Because I kind of included mine in my talking point.
I don't know. Those are my. There's just so many.
Yeah.
I love like the classic too is like Making of a Murderer, which I think kickstarted the Netflix thing.
Yeah.
But with that one, I think it fed too much into its hype a bit. I think.
Yeah.
And I don't think it presented a fully accurate story. Like they were not objective at all. But I think that's still a really good one to watch if you need something super bingeable.
Yeah. You can binge season 1. I had a hard time with season 2.
I didn't even do season 2. So. After I read all the news articles about season 1, I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to watch season 2. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, Making a Murderer. When that came out, it was another one of those phenomenons.
Yeah.
And Amanda Knox. Like, what is with
that one's really good, too.
Yeah, I just watched that.
Yeah.
Another one of those ones where you're just so frustrated.
Or there's also Evil Genius. I really liked that one.
Oh, because that puts because there was that Jesse Eisenberg movie, 30 minutes or less, that was like like loosely based on that story and made it into this like big joke because it was about, oh, this pizza delivery guy gets, a bomb strapped to him. And then so whenever I actually watched the documentary, I was kind of like really upset that they treated that story so casually because it was kind of heartbreaking. All right, that does it for another episode of a documentary podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, wherever.
And you can check out our Instagram at A Documentary Podcast.
You can go to our website, adocumentarypodcast.com.
And then also our own Instagrams. Mine's at CMS Moments.
And I'm at Joshua LeBure. And the music is by Timothy DeCans. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Yeah, see you in a few weeks.